Hello, and welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz, and today is True Crime Tuesday. Anyhow, this past Sunday was Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. Thank you for everything that you do. Well, most of you anyways. The last 2 weeks, our moms that we highlighted were, well, you can go have a listen, but pretty horrific. And this month we are focusing on crimes involving mothers in some capacity. So let's get right into it. Today we are going to talk about a woman who either had extremely bad or good luck, or a little of both depending on how you look at it. Let's start by meeting Marilyn Barron. When we begin our story, it's 1966, and Marilyn is living in upstate New York with her husband, Edward, and her 4 children, Peter, Joyce, Shirley, and Lita, ages 11 to 4. So one night, when Marilyn's husband is at work and can't get a hold of his wife, he sends his sister to check on her, and what she finds is simply devastating. 3 of Marilyn's children were dead in their beds, and Marilyn was barely conscious on the floor, but would end up surviving. The incident would be investigated, and it would be determined that the family dog must have knocked into a pipe and caused a carbon monoxide leak. 7-year-old Shirley Barron would be the sole surviving child, and this was only because she was spending the night at her grandmother's, who lived down the road. She would later say that she had tricked her sister Joyce to get to stay there instead that night, and this would bring a large amount of survival guilt to the young girl. It was reported that Shirley had an understandably troubled childhood after this incident, and the kids at her school wouldn't be much help, unfortunately, giving her the nickname Squirrely Shirley. It's reported that she was displaying behaviors such as biting, scratching, and throwing things. She did grow up though, and in 1975 she got pregnant with her first child, who she had when she was just 16. In 1977, Shirley would marry her daughter's father, Ronald Winters. She was 18 at the time, and he was 21. A year later, they would have a second child, who they would name John. The couple was staying at Shirley's parents' cabin in upstate New York, and John was at work when the cabin caught fire with Shirley and their 2 children inside. When the fire broke out, Shirley was sleeping on the couch watching TV, and the children were sleeping in their rooms. By the time the fire woke Shirley up, the smoke was extremely heavy and she was unable to get into her children's rooms, and they ended up dying. It was determined that the kindling from the fireplace had started this fire. After this tragedy, Shirley and John ended their relationship, but would end up remaining friends. Well, apparently a little more than friends, because in 1980 they would go on to have their 3rd son together, who they named Ronald Winters III. The family would move into a trailer together and attempt to start over, but just a few months later, local authorities would receive a frantic call from Shirley, who claimed that her baby wasn't breathing. It would be determined that poor little Ronnie had died of SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. So where do we go from here? We have a series of very tragic events, all with one thing in common: Shirley. It seemed that Shirley just had some really, really awful luck, or did she? The year after Ronnie passed, 2 more fires broke out in Shirley and Ronnie's trailer, and they were determined to be arson. Shirley was in the process of being investigated and charged with arson in this instance when a 3rd trailer fire breaks out, and she is charged with arson again. All right, so what's going on here, Shirley? After this, she would go on to have 2 more daughters with Ronald, Joy in 1984 and Ashley in 1985. Then in 1986, a fire would break out in the apartment they were living in, and the cause of the fire would be, ready for this, undetermined. Really? At this point, I'm thinking we can make some assumptions about fires starting around Shirley, but that's just me. Then in 1987, Shirley and Ronald have another child who they will name Clayton. Unfortunately, things become too much for them in their marriage, and the couple divorces after 10 years together and 6 children. Shirley would take her 3 surviving children and move them to Syracuse. Shortly after moving to Syracuse, there is, ready, another fire. This time she is put on trial where the first jury is deadlocked and the second jury acquits her. During this time, 2 more fires start at apartments she is staying at, and a third one breaks out in her mother's basement. The 4th, or rather 5th, fire that breaks out after Shirley moves to Syracuse is significant, as if the other 4 weren't, but this fire was also determined to be arson, and it was started in the basement in the apartment building where Shirley was staying at the time. Shirley would report that she was able to get her 2 younger children to safety, but lost track of her oldest, Joy, with all the heavy smoke. Luckily, Joy was able to get herself to safety at just 5 years old. Now, our story is going to start getting a little twisted, or I guess more twisted. Apparently, after she escaped from the fire, Joy would tell people that Shirley told her to stay inside before leaving with her 2 siblings. Luckily, she didn't listen. She would move on to another house where another arson would take place. This is number 6 in just 3 years we know of. After this one, a family court judge removes her 3 children from her custody and places them with their father. When this happens, Shirley admits herself into a psychiatric center for a few days. This last fire took place on January 6, 1990, and she would end up being indicted for it. So then, on March of that year, another arson occurs where she's living, and this time she has downstairs neighbors. Luckily, they are able to escape with their 22-month-old child. Then in September of this year, the garage of Shirley's aunt catches fire, and in October, the garage is set on fire again, and this time it destroys the garage and the house. Shirley is arrested, and during this process, she assaults the deputy and damages their patrol car. Clearly, she is spiraling here. Then, in November of this same year, Shirley will be charged with her 4th arson charge. I think she might have around 16 known or suspected events of arson at this point, but it's her 4th charge. And this time it's for setting fire to the local bowling alley. Come on, Shirley! Things quiet down for a little bit after the wild year of 1990 she had, and it seems Shirley may have been trying to change for the better. But then in 1997, Shirley's mother would die in a car crash and the house would be left to Shirley. Shirley would end up setting fire to her mother's old house with the knowledge that her cousin was in the building when she set the fire. This arson would get her sent to prison for 8 years. She was released in 2004 on parole, but quickly sent back to prison for violating her terms of release by owning a lighter. She would finish up her 8-year sentence and then be released. Unfortunately, things were about to get a whole lot worse and would end up revealing some very dark secrets in Shirley's past, as if there weren't enough already. In 2006, Shirley was staying in an apartment in Piermont, New York with some acquaintances. One of the people who was staying there was Connie with her 2-year-old son, Ryan Rivers. On November 28th, Connie was unable to find her son in the evening and was frantically looking around the apartment for him. She passed by Shirley on her way up to the bathroom, where she would ultimately find little Ryan in the bathtub dead. An autopsy would reveal that Ryan died from drowning, but the amount of water found in his lungs was described as being more than would have been found if he had drowned naturally. They also found bruises on his temple and rubbing alcohol in his bloodstream, which was extremely suspicious. Connie would also tell investigators that there was no way Ryan would just climb into the tub by himself, as he was afraid of taking baths. Shortly after Ryan's suspicious passing, Shirley was pulled over driving a pickup truck, and she was swerving all over. She was described as being disheveled with blood on her torn shirt and scratches all over her upper body. Not only that, she was muttering that the evil has to stop and the evil has to get out. Shirley would tell the officer she had not taken her schizophrenia medication and was lost on the way to the psychiatric hospital. Then in 2007, Shirley was in another trailer and a different trailer park, and another suspicious fire would occur. Surprise, surprise. After this, Shirley would attempt to take her own life by overdosing on her medicine. She would end up surviving and later being served with an indictment for the death of little Ryan Rivers. During the investigation, they decide to look closer into the circumstances surrounding the death of Shirley's first 3 children. They would end up actually digging up the bodies of the children and re-examining them, and what they found was simply horrific. Her first 2 children had what appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head and had perished before they were set on fire. She would be indicted for the murder of little Ronnie, who she actually admitted to suffocating. So at this point, she has 2 indictments, one for little Ryan and one for Ronnie, who she killed 27 years prior. She goes to trial and is sentenced for 2 concurrent prison sentences in 2008. She received 20 years for first-degree manslaughter in the Ryan Rivers charge and 8.5 to 25 years for first-degree manslaughter in the Ronald Winters, the 3rd charge. The investigation into the murders of her first 2 children was discontinued due to a plea deal that Shirley ended up taking. Since she is serving her sentences concurrently, she could be eligible for release in 2028. This is just slightly disturbing. Anyways, there are a few more noteworthy things in the Shirley Winters case. For starters, over the years, Shirley would receive numerous diagnoses, including dissociative disorder, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, psychogenic amnesia, and pyromania. She would not always stay on the medication that she was prescribed for these disorders for various reasons, ranging from being unable to afford them to the fear that they were making her gain weight. There was also speculation that her childhood trauma caused her to want to recreate the event, and her method of doing this was through arson. She would claim that every year on the eve of her sibling's death that she would feel this terrible sensation that she was going to die. She claimed that it would be fate. One of her therapists thought that the arsons were somehow an attempt to master the anxiety that she couldn't escape from her childhood. Kind of makes sense. She also killed her son Ronald III on her mother's birthday. Another potential arson and murder occurred a few days before the house fire that Shirley used to cover up killing her first 2 children. One of her friends down the road had a house fire that claimed the lives of their 3 children. This friend was also coincidentally, or maybe not so much, related to Ryan Rivers' family. So I'm thinking either she did that too, probably, or thought it would be a great idea to use on her own family for her own tragedy. And really, both options are just terrible. There's also an incident that occurred when Shirley was just 6, where her sister's dress caught on fire. It was described as traumatic for Shirley, but doesn't that kind of make you wonder too? Then the next year, the carbon monoxide leak, that was an accident. What if she was behind those as well? I mean, she was the only child who wasn't in the house, but I guess we'll never know at this point unless she confesses to it. So let's just recap really quick, because there was a lot to take on with this one. Shirley Barron Winters was not only a serial arsonist, she was most likely, I'm gonna say definitely a serial killer as well. She had 6 children and killed 3 of them. Unfortunately, they weren't investigated properly, and this left her free to ultimately kill someone else's child. So that's at least 4 murders. 7 if she killed her friend's kids in that earlier fire, and 10 if she had anything to do with the gas leak in her childhood. So that's a good count there. Along with this, she set at least 18 serious fires and was charged with 5 counts of arson, along with 2 counts of manslaughter. In 2028, when she may be eligible to be released, she will be 70 years old, but with her track record, I'm willing to bet she still has a little spark in her. Anyhow, that is going to do it for today's story, but as always, let's end today on a more positive note. I thought with all the arson in today's story, we would include a feel-good story involving a fire, if you can call it that. So last March in New York City, Brooklyn to be specific, Juan was moving some things into a new apartment when he saw smoke from a nearby building. It looked like the building had caught fire from the top floor. As he got closer to have a look, he heard screams, and neighbors would describe him scaling the side of the building like a Spider-Man, kind of, to help pass 3 children down the side of the building to safety below. The children's ages ranged from 4 years old to 3 months old. After this, Juan did lose his footing on the side of the building, but by that time the firefighters had arrived and they were able to extend their tower ladder to rescue the parents and another child who was still inside. Juan is an example of someone stepping up and putting himself in danger to help others, and our world could really use more people like him. Anyhow, guys, let me know what you think about today's story in the comments below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and stay safe out there. Bye!